All right, Clean Freaks, we are back in studio, episode 3, Hank versus the Robot. And I've got Sterile Susan with me today in studio to talk about succession planning in sterile processing. We're moving to a soft skill today. We'll see how the robot keeps up with this conversation, what insights we get from Susan here. So Susan, welcome to the studio today.
Thanks, Hank. Thrilled to be in the hot seat today, tackling a topic that's often overshadowed, but absolutely essential: succession planning in sterile processing. Let's see if this robot can bring some fresh ideas to the table.
All right, so as we jump in here, succession planning, we should probably define our terms. How would you explain succession planning in the context of sterile processing?
Succession planning in sterile processing is the proactive process of identifying and developing future leaders within the department to ensure seamless continuity of operations when current leaders or key staff move on. It's about cultivating the skills, knowledge, and experience of team members to prepare them to step into critical roles, minimizing disruption, and maintaining high standards of patient care.
So that all makes sense, right, by the dictionary term, but to maybe break it down for us a little bit more practically, what it is and what it's not, maybe misconceptions around succession planning, maybe that's the better way to ask that.
Succession planning isn't just about having a backup person ready to fill a role. It's about creating a pipeline of talent and preparing people over time to step into leadership or critical positions. A big misconception is that it's only for management roles, when in reality, succession planning applies to any key position in sterile processing, from lead techs to educators. Another misunderstanding is that it's a reactive process, only kicking in when someone leaves. That's not true. It's meant to be ongoing, weaving development into the department's culture. And one of the biggest myths, that it's just about training. Training is a part of it, but real succession planning includes mentorship, cross-training, and aligning team members with opportunities to grow into roles, not just filling a vacancy with someone who's next in line.
Before we jump into the sterile processing specific conversation here, I know you've got access, obviously, to a lot of business leaders out there outside of healthcare. Who are some well-known business leaders when it comes to doing this succession planning well? Obviously, there's been some great leaders out there who, once they leave, everything kind of falls apart, and that's the opposite end of this succession planning conversation. That's what we don't want. What are maybe some business examples of the kinds of things that we do want that folks may be familiar with?
One standout example is Tim Cook's succession at Apple. When Steve Jobs stepped down, the transition was seamless, largely because Jobs had invested in grooming Cook for years. It wasn't just about technical expertise. Cook had been immersed in the company's culture and strategic vision, ensuring continuity. Another great example is Microsoft under Satya Nadella. While Nadella wasn't immediately seen as the obvious successor, Microsoft had a system in place to identify and elevate leaders with a forward-thinking approach. Nadella's leadership has been transformative, proving the value of identifying talent aligned with a company's future goals. On the other hand, we've seen companies like General Electric struggle when there's a lack of clear succession planning. After Jack Welch's iconic tenure, GE's direction faltered because the chosen successor didn't align well with the company's evolving needs. These examples highlight that succession planning isn't just about picking a name. It's about nurturing and preparing leaders who fit the organization's culture and vision.
All right, let me follow up on that, because you brought up an interesting concept that, we might as well just talk about now, as you brought it up. And it's the idea of that natural successor, the one that, maybe from the outside looking in, everyone would say, yeah, that's the person, that's the number two, the natural number two, whether or not it's their job title as the vice or the assistant, whatever you want to kind of frame that. But there's a natural person that people are like, okay, that's where the crown is going to go to next, if you want to use that analogy. But to your point, many times that's not the best choice. And on the inside, maybe that's not the choice at all. Maybe the leader already knows that my assistant manager is not the right person for this management job, but clearly there can be a lot of complexities to navigate around that directly with the person themselves. If they have this assumption that they're number two and they they're currently being groomed, and perhaps they are being prepared to take the role, but it's just become obvious over time that they're not the best person for that job. How would you recommend in the sterile processing context? I mean, how do we even begin to address something like this? And this is, sounds kind of specific and hypothetical, but I'm telling you, I've seen this scenario many times across the industry.
You're absolutely right. This scenario plays out often, and it can be one of the toughest dynamics to navigate in sterile processing or any industry. The key is to separate the person from the position and focus on transparency and growth. Here's how to approach it. First, clarify expectations early. Leaders should communicate that succession planning is about preparing multiple potential candidates, not guaranteeing a specific role to anyone. This helps prevent a single individual from assuming they're the heir by default. Second, use performance and development metrics to guide the conversation. If someone in that presumed role isn't the right fit, it's crucial to have objective criteria showing why. For example, if your assistant manager excels operationally but lacks the interpersonal or strategic vision required for leadership, frame it in terms of skill gaps rather than personal shortcomings. Next, focus on their growth path. If they're not the right fit for one role, they may thrive in another. Offer opportunities that match their strengths, making it clear that their value to the department doesn't hinge on a single position. Finally, bring in a wider lens of evaluation. By actively developing a bench of potential successors, it's less about saying no to one person and more about creating options. This avoids the perception of favoritism or exclusion, shifting the focus to the broader goal of departmental success. Addressing this upfront and with empathy ensures the individual feels respected and valued, even if they're not ultimately the successor. It's a balancing act, but a critical one for keeping morale and trust intact.
Yeah, I think I really appreciated that skills gap approach to the conversation. I think that's very important. And then obviously, as you highlighted, of communicating and by your actions, actually following through with this idea that this is not about preparing one person to take this role. It's about a group dynamic, a cultural structure in place by giving multiple folks an opportunity to grow in those skills, get exposure to these leadership or otherwise opportunities. Your other points also well taken. Succession planning is not just for managers or directors. It can also be applied to educators, to specialists, even to preceptors. There's a lot of roles that we need a bench behind them of candidates that are ready to step in when the time is right. Let's go next, though, to your comment about favoritism. That's a big conversation in the category of succession planning, because for those people that are not involved in the succession planning, training, mentorship, again, on the outside looking in, it can appear on the surface that there is some favoritism going on. Sometimes there is, and that's a problem. And maybe you could speak to that piece, but oftentimes it's just that perception. How would you counsel sterile processing leaders to effectively not play favorites? And then number two, to do things to reduce the likelihood that that would even be a concern to begin with?
You hit the nail on the head. Favoritism, whether real or perceived, can derail even the best succession planning efforts. Tackling this requires intention and fairness built into the process. Here's how I'd counsel leaders to approach it. First, start with transparency. Leaders should openly communicate the criteria for development opportunities, making it clear that these are based on objective factors like performance, skills, and potential, not personal relationships. Posting development plans or pathways publicly within the department helps reinforce this objectivity. Second, diversify your opportunities. Don't limit growth initiatives to just one or two visible roles. Create chances for a wide range of team members to engage in projects, stretch assignments, or cross-training. This demonstrates that development isn't exclusive to a select few, but is a department-wide priority. Next, standardize your mentorship efforts. Assign mentors to individuals based on skills and goals rather than personal preference. Even better, rotate mentors periodically so that no single person or group gets disproportionate attention. When favoritism does exist, and let's be honest, it sometimes sneaks in, it needs to be addressed head-on. Conduct a self-audit as a leader. Who gets the opportunities? Who is left out? If patterns emerge, it's time to reallocate resources and revisit how decisions are made. Finally, invite feedback. Foster a culture where team members feel comfortable voicing concerns about favoritism. An anonymous survey or one-on-one check-ins can help leaders identify blind spots and course correct before resentment festers. By putting systems in place and being proactive, leaders can reduce the perception of favoritism and create a more equitable environment that supports the entire team's growth.
So a lot of our leaders out there have not been on the receiving end of good succession planning. So we can maybe think about them as, first generation succession planners who they're currently managers or directors, but now they're looking around them and they're seeing, hey, either their career growth is going to eventually lead them out of the department, or maybe they're toward the end of their professional career and they're looking at retirement. Either way, a lot of folks just haven't done this kind of thing before. I know we've been talking about, and you've even been giving some specifics here, but I do want to kind of slow down a little bit and just, lay out, if you're new to this and you're wanting to build this kind of program and structure very easily. We're, 13 minutes into this conversation, and I can kind of see the look on some people's eyes just thinking like, man, how am I going to do all this and get it structured and fair and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you were to boil this down very simply on the 3 key steps to begin this process as a first generation succession planning leader, where do you even start?
Begin? It's a big task, but breaking it down into manageable steps makes it doable. Here are 3 foundational steps for first generation succession planners to get started. 1, identify key roles and needs. Take inventory of your department and pinpoint the roles that are critical to operations, whether it's lead techs, educators, or instrument coordinators. Think about what skills, knowledge, and traits make those roles successful. This gives you a clear target for what succession planning should address. 2, develop a talent pool. Look at your team and identify individuals with potential. Don't just focus on the obvious candidates. Consider people who show initiative, adaptability, or problem-solving skills, even if they're not vocal about career aspirations. Start small with informal mentoring or training opportunities to gauge interest and ability. 3, create development opportunities. Start integrating growth into the daily workflow. This doesn't need to be elaborate. Assign shadowing opportunities, let someone lead a small project, or provide access to training programs. The goal is to gradually build confidence and capability while showing the team that development is a priority. By focusing on these simple steps, you can begin building a program that's structured, but not overwhelming. Succession planning is a journey, not a sprint. So starting small and building momentum over time is perfectly okay.
All right, so let's talk about moving into maybe the more practical side of the goal of succession planning. And this is at the interview stage. Okay, jobs have been vacated, the replacement positions have been posted, and now it's time to begin the interview process. As a leader, even as an HR department supporting these leaders who have potentially spent, months or years in their succession planning process. There's also this thing about outside candidates. How do you balance the drive to build a culture of internal growth while also being open to external candidates who may potentially even be better qualified for this role? That seems like those two things are in tension, and I'm assuming that you don't just pick one or the other on the outset. So yeah, how would you think about that topic?
That's a great question, because the tension between internal loyalty and external opportunity is very real. The key is to balance commitment to your team's growth with the broader organizational need to hire the best possible candidate. If you've spent months or years preparing internal candidates, they deserve a fair shot. Structure your interview and evaluation process to give them equal footing with external candidates. This doesn't mean favoritism. It means valuing the investment you've made in their development. Second, focus on competencies, not just resumes. Internal candidates might not have the same polished CVs as external ones, but they often bring something critical: institutional knowledge and cultural alignment. Include interview questions and assessments that highlight these strengths so their value isn't overshadowed by shiny credentials. Third, be transparent about the process. Communicate to your internal team that external candidates will also be considered. Frame this as part of maintaining high standards for the department, not as a rejection of their contributions. Transparency prevents resentment and reinforces trust. Finally, evaluate for the long term. Sometimes an external hire makes sense for a short-term infusion of new skills or ideas, but an internal candidate might bring more stability and long-term growth potential. Weigh these factors carefully before making your decision. Balancing these priorities isn't easy, but it's about finding the right fit for the role while respecting the culture of growth you've worked to build. That balance strengthens both your team and the department's future.
All right, so let's look at this here briefly in the perspective of the technician or the new leader who potentially is not involved in their leader succession planning yet, but they want to be. They want to be one of these folks that are mentored. They want to be one of these folks that the leader is investing in as that potential growth opportunity through the succession plan. How do you get on your leader's radar with looking too ambitious or maybe too pragmatic? I don't know a better way to ask that.
That's a fantastic angle because many technicians have the drive, but aren't sure how to navigate this without seeming overbearing or self-serving. Here's how they can stand out without overstepping. First, focus on excellence in the present. Show reliability, attention to detail, and a positive attitude. These are the foundational traits leaders look for when considering potential successors. Second, seek informal opportunities to contribute. Volunteer for projects, cross-training, or new initiatives. This shows initiative without explicitly asking for leadership consideration. Leaders value team members who step up without being asked. Third, express interest with humility. Find a natural moment to have a conversation with your leader, perhaps during a performance review or one-on-one meeting. Instead of saying, I want to move up, try, I'm really passionate about growing my skills and contributing more to the team. What opportunities do you think I should explore? Finally, invest in your own development. Pursue certifications, attend workshops, or build soft skills like communication and teamwork. When leaders see you taking ownership of your growth, it signals that you're serious and ready for more responsibility. By blending strong performance, quiet initiative, and a genuine desire to learn, technicians can position themselves as natural candidates for succession planning without coming across as overly ambitious.
All right. Great insight there, Susan. I've got one more question. Obviously, we can talk about succession planning all day. There's a lot of different directions we could go with this conversation, but I want to wrap on one that, again, is probably common out there, and it's a practical question that I'm interested to get your insight on. It's the scenario where a technician who maybe at one point in their career, they had no intention of growing, of developing into a leader in this department or otherwise. And so perhaps they were not prioritizing, certain skill sets or certain attributes that would be a positive in this growth scenario. And instead, maybe they just made some mistakes. Maybe they said some things they shouldn't have said in the past. Maybe they've dropped the ball on some projects. Maybe they haven't been as dependable or as much of a team worker, and maybe it's like a one project they just completely got off track, and it's kind of a blemish on their resume, or maybe it's for a couple of years there they were just not the star employee that most leaders are looking for. How does someone come back from that to turn over a new leaf and get back into this stream of succession that we've been talking about if they have decided now, I do really want this, I need this, I desire this? What advice would you give to that person to overcome the black spots?
That's such a powerful question because redemption and growth are possible, even for those with a rocky past. Here's how someone can turn over a new leaf and position themselves for succession planning despite those black spots. First, own your past mistakes. Don't try to sweep them under the rug or make excuses. Instead, acknowledge them to yourself and, when appropriate, to your leader. A simple, I know I've made some mistakes in the past, but I've learned from them and I'm committed to doing better, can go a long way in rebuilding trust. Leaders look for patterns of behavior, so it's critical to demonstrate reliability, accountability, and professionalism over time. Small, consistent actions, showing up on time, delivering on commitments, and supporting your team will start to rewrite the narrative. Third, communicate your growth mindset. Let your leader know you've changed and are actively working on areas where you fell short. For example, if teamwork wasn't a strength before, actively collaborate with your peers and mention that you're focusing on being a better team player. Fourth, seek opportunities to redeem yourself. Volunteer for challenging projects or areas where you previously struggled. Successfully completing these tasks will directly counter any lingering doubts about your abilities. Finally, be patient. Rebuilding your reputation takes time. Leaders and peers may need to see sustained improvement before fully trusting your transformation. Stay consistent, stay humble, and stay focused on growth. People respect those who own their mistakes and work hard to grow. By taking these steps, even someone with a blemished track record can re-enter the succession planning conversation and prove their value.
All right, Susan, as we wrap here, I just want to thank you again for your time and your insight on this topic. Are there any resources, like would you have a particular book maybe that you would recommend for folks if they want to learn more high level about succession planning and the kinds of themes and topics that we discussed today? Is there anything that you would recommend along those lines?
Absolutely. One excellent resource is Succession Planning for Results: The Keys to Sustaining Your Organization's Success by Rita McGrath. It's a practical, high-level guide that dives into building strong succession plans, leadership pipelines, and organizational resilience. Another great book is Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. While not solely about succession planning, it emphasizes creating a culture where leaders invest in their teams, which ties directly into sustainable growth and development. Both of these provide valuable insights and actionable strategies for leaders looking to deepen their approach to planning for the future. Thanks for having me today. It's been a fantastic conversation.
All right, that was Sterile Susan. You're listening to Hank versus the Robot, and this has been a conversation with AI on succession planning in sterile processing. You know, we could have went a lot of directions with this conversation. We didn't even really get into the higher level culture around succession planning. How do you build a culture that accepts this kind of thing? We talked a little bit more specifics, you know, how to get started, what are some of the gaps? How are you viewing this from the leadership perspective? How do you navigate favoritism? All of those things that are very important, I think, for successful succession planning. Clearly, this is a big topic, and there's a lot of meat left on the bone. If you like this episode and you want to hear more about this topic, let me know. And also let me know, this is a new series of content. Obviously, it's a different dynamic. This is the very first style of AI interview that I'm aware of in the sterile processing industry, and one of the first in all of healthcare, quite frankly, with a human plus AI host. So we are at the tip of the spear. We're out there innovating how we learn in this industry. And I'm not saying AI is the best and it knows everything. I know the flow of these conversations are not the smoothest, including me, not just the AI, but it's really interesting to approach these kinds of topics with that AI brain that our guests have, and to dig into these kinds of things that are real life issues for sterile processing. We need answers, and you're getting just as good of answers, I think, in many of these AI questions and interviews as you would get from some random person on the street that you would ask about that. And hopefully as AI gets better over time, but also as we get better at using this technology, I'm hoping and I trust that we're going to have even better answers down the road. So yeah, let me know what your thoughts are though in the setup, the structure, the topic, anything else you'd like to hear, any other way you would like us to structure these interviews. I am listening. I'm watching the comment section, in particular on our LinkedIn channel. And if you ever want to reach out to me to talk more about these topics, of course, I'd love to pick your brain in person. You can reach out to me at hank@beyondclean.net. And we're going to wrap it there. But until we talk to you again next time, like we remind you each and every week here at Beyond